Ladies and gentlemen, James Lane here, and in this segment, we're going to talk all about how Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo stopped a secret Chinese communist 5G invasion through the company HUAWEI. Now, we didn't hear a lot about this. It was happening behind the scenes through all the hubbub and hoopla that's been going on. But folks, you're not going to want to miss what could have happened and thankfully what's happening now. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, how you doing tonight? James Lane here, and I came across this really great article that kind of details this possible invasion that could have happened, this digital invasion, whereas if HUAWEI would have taken over the 5G in the United States, they would have had their own pipeline, their own superconductive highway right into the hearts, minds, and souls of the American people. And Lord knows the Chinese Communist Party has done enough damage. So it's kind of a very long read, and I figured it would dissuade a lot of people because it was so long. But the information in it is very important for us to know, since we're fighting a war on all fronts. We have a technological war, we have a cyber war, which is separate. You know, in a lot of ways, we have big tech in companies that are basically allowing Chinese and Russian and Iranian hackers to come in through the back door. We have a cyber war taking place on social media where foreign assets and brainwashed American assets are attacking the very values and traditions that make this country wonderful. So it's very important for us to be armed with this information, to start understanding the enemy, understanding how the Chinese Communist Party works. Because remember, every Chinese business that's doing business, for lack of a better term, overseas with the United States, they are controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. That's how communism works. So without further ado, I want to start this. I want to get through this article with you, and I want to discuss basically what's been going on and possibly some of the ramifications that could come out of it. So before we do that, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. It really, really helps when you do that, all right? It helps so that you see what we put out. We put out stuff pretty much every day, and it's very important because the information we put out, you're not going to find anywhere else, and it's the type of compelling information that you can use to wake people up. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, U.S. turns tide on HUAWEI, ending CCP's 5G master plan. This is from the Epic Times. It came out December 29th, 2020, and it's by Amel Akan. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. The Trump administration scored a victory against the regime in Beijing this year through its Clean Network campaign that booted HUAWEI Technologies company out of critical telecommunications infrastructure, not just in the United States, but in many countries, ladies and gentlemen. The effort, while not well publicized, secured an array of commitments from governments to exclude untrusted vendors from their fifth-generation wireless networks. If anyone was ever wondering what 5G stood for, ding, 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 you have a Jeopardy question right here. What is fifth generation? As of this month, more than 50 nations, representing over 2/3 of the entire world's economy, and 180 telecom companies had joined the Clean Network Initiative led by the U.S. government. The alliance includes 26 of the 27 EU member states, as well as technologically advanced countries such as Japan, Israel, Australia, Singapore, Taiwan, Canada, New Zealand, and India. This triumph for the U.S. government seemed unthinkable at the beginning of the year, as the Chinese telecom giant, a dominant player in the global 5G market, seemed unbeatable. For years, the United States had sought to convince its allies to shun Chinese vendors such as HUAWEI and ZTE on national security grounds, and the Trump administration had warned about the risks of reliance on Chinese technologies, which were deeply embedded in the next generation of global telecommunications, but those efforts had failed to check HUAWEI. So in February, Huawei announced that it had 91 commercial 5G contracts outside of China. And make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, the Chinese Communist Party can see into every single one of those. Like a peeping Tom sitting outside of your window with a pair of binoculars, ladies and gentlemen, the Chinese Communist Party could see into the very deepest, darkest, and dirtiest of your laundries, if that would have come to fruition. In February, Huawei announced that it had 91 commercial 5G contracts outside of China, with 47 of the contracts in Europe and 20 in Asia. In January, for example, the UK declared that it would allow Huawei to supply 5G equipment, sparking tensions between London and Washington. Quote, the U.S. is repeatedly pursuing its allied countries to ban Huawei from developing 5G, but most of them have denied doing so. Huawei stated on its website in February. To turn the tide, the State Department in April launched a campaign requiring a, quote, clean path for all standalone 5G network traffic entering and exiting U.S. diplomatic facilities, as outlined in the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act. The Clean Path was the first of several clean network strategic moves that the administration rolled out to keep U.S. critical data and networks safe from the Chinese Communist Party. The following month, the Commerce Department tightened export controls on Huawei, calling it a security threat. The Pentagon later blacklisted the company because of its ties to the Chinese military. You remember that? That happened a little bit earlier in the year when they banned Huawei. People were all up in arms about it on the left. I remember that. And then all of a sudden, like most news stories that aren't catchy and flashy, it poofed, went bye-bye. It disappeared. As part of the plan, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company announced in May that it would build the world's most advanced 5-nanometer chip fabrication facility in Arizona, an important milestone in securing the semiconductor supply chain and a safe 5G network for the United States and its partners. The Clean Network seeks to address what the U.S. State Department describes as, quote, the long-term threat to data privacy, security, human rights, and principled collaboration posed to the free world from authoritarian, malign actors. The State Department conducted. The Clean Network seeks to address what the U.S. State Department describes as the, quote, long-term threat to data privacy, security, human rights, and principled collaboration posed to the free world from authoritarian, malign actors. The State Department conducted international outreach to explain U.S. actions on Huawei and urged other countries to take similar measures to secure their 5G networks and to protect their citizens' personal information. Keith Crack, Undersecretary. That's fun to say, by the way. Keith Crack. Sounds like a pro wrestler name. Keith Crack. Well, it could be a rock star name, too. Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Keith Crack, Energy and the Environment. Keith Crack was the person behind the effort. A former businessman. All right, I'm going to just say it one more time. Keith Crack. Okay, we're done. No more. All right. A former businessman and Silicon Valley veteran. Crack coined, I wonder if he hangs out with Hunter Biden. Coined the term Clean Network and led the initiative to take away Huawei's momentum by unifying allies. And within a few months, the network garnered overwhelming international support. Today, the vast majority of EU, NATO, and OECD members embrace the Clean Network program. Quote, the Clean Network's momentum turned the tide on Huawei and the CCP's 5G master plan. Crack told the Epoch Times it proved that China Incorporated is beatable, and in the process we exposed their biggest weakness, its lack of trust. They tried to get into this country. They tried to get into our networks, but we began to build our own. Don't you remember earlier in the year when President Trump came out, by the way, and said that we have major problems in our networks and our 5Gs and our security? We need to build a United States firewall against the rest of the world, especially China. They've been talking about this for a year. This isn't new news, ladies and gentlemen. They tried to invade, just like they and other actors tried to permanently cripple us with the cyber Pearl Harbor that just happened. But we have put up enough of a fight that even though we've taken some hits, they have not beaten us, and in fact are now backtracking, fumbling, and falling on themselves. I know that they try to make it look like China's winning and the left is winning, but I promise you, they're not. It's all smoke and mirrors, ladies and gentlemen, all smoke and mirrors, just like a surveillance state. A surveillance state is all smoke and mirrors. And speaking of surveillance state, the next section is called the backbone of surveillance state. The biggest weakness of Chinese companies such as Huawei is that nobody trusts them, according to Crack, and this trust issue has become a strategic tool for the U.S. government. Since China passed the National Intelligence Act in June 2017, all Chinese citizens and companies have been legally obliged to turn over any information or data to the communist regime upon request. That means that every single Chinese citizen and every single Chinese company is an extension of communist China. You remember the Matrix? You remember the agents in the Matrix? Anybody plugged into the Matrix could be an agent. Anybody plugged into the Chinese Communist government could be eyes and ears for the most evil regime on earth, ladies and gentlemen. The most evil regime on earth. So evil, I said it twice. Huawei is the backbone of the CCP's surveillance state, according to Crack. And for years, the regime has strong-armed governments around the world to purchase its 5G infrastructure and services. So, that 800-pound elephant in the room, Crack says, countries and companies are terrified of the CCP. By the way, that's what Keith Crack looks like. Okay, I have to say something really quick. Is it just me, or is Keith Crack like young from here up? And for those listening, Keith Crack is a very interesting looking gentleman, and half of his face above the halfway point of his nose looks like he's 27 years old. And then from right above his nose and down, he looks like he's 70 years old or 80 years old. I don't know what his lotioning regimen is or his facial cleanser regime, but I think he's only getting half of his face. I don't know. Anyway, let's get back on subject. The 800-pound elephant in the room, Crack says, quote, countries and companies are terrified of the CCP's doctrine of intimidation, retaliation, and retribution, and that basically is a bully. When you confront a bully, they back down, and they really back down if you have your friends by your side. The growing coalition is a security blanket for countries and telecom operators to guard against Beijing's retaliation. Do you remember during the Cold War, or if you've read about the Cold War, we had allies all around the Iron Curtain. We set up missile bases all around the Iron Curtain to contain the spread of communism, of course. Folks, it's the same type of thing. Our allies create a network of countries blocking the spread of communist China's evil spying eye. So far, 27 out of 30 and 31 out of 37 OECD members have joined the Clean Network, all right? And following the U.S. government's campaign, Huawei's deals outside of China, from 91 of them fell to just about a dozen, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what I call stopping a secret invasion. In a major win for Trump administration, the UK announced in July its decision, all right? It had plans. This decision were the plans to ban Huawei from the future 5G networks, all right? That reversed a January decision. The mobile providers in the country will be barred from buying new Huawei equipment after December 31st. Now, it took a while, but the tide also turned in Germany, Crack said, and Berlin prepared legislation that would impose tough new restrictions on telecom equipment providers and make it next to impossible to include communist companies like Huawei in the build-out of the country's 5G networks. Quote, we've turned the tide on Chinese Communist Party's 5G master plan. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wrote on Twitter, that is nothing like how he sounds. He kind of actually sounds more like, we've turned the tide on the Chinese Communist Party. I can't do a Mike Pompeo. I do respect him, though, so I'm just joking around. But Mike Pompeo's a boss. He's a boss. I feel like he could, headbutt somebody to death, and his facial expression wouldn't change. I really, come on, do you really think it would? The U.S. proudly joins our EU, 3Cs Summit, NATO, and OECD partners and allies in the Clean Network to counter CCP malign influence. Alliances built on trust will always prevail against surveillance states. Beijing has been furious over the U.S. government's Clean Network campaign. In September, the China Daily newspaper, which is owned by the CCP, because all newspapers in China are owned by the CCP technically, criticized Pompeo for declaring victory against the Chinese regime. Quote, the bid to strangle Huawei shows the ruthless methods the U.S. administration is using to hold on to the U.S. hegemony in technology. That's how I imagined the evil Chinese communist, like if they had an evil emperor like Star Wars, that's what I would just imagine they sound like. In August, Pompeo announced the expansion of the Clean Network program to include clean carriers, ensuring no untrusted carriers, such as those from China, are connected to the network. Clean apps and app stores, clean cloud services, protecting America's data, and clean cable, ensuring underwater cabling connecting the United States to the global internet are protected. So that's something a lot of people don't realize. There's giant thousands of miles worth of underwater cable that connect a lot of this stuff. People don't understand that really exists. This isn't just floating around in the air like some sci-fi movie. This crap is hardwired. Under the sea, under the sea. Internet's better when it's wetter. Take it from, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but it's true. It's absolutely, absolutely true. Look it up. I'm serious. As part of the effort, President Donald Trump signed in August 2 executive orders to address the threats posed by Chinese-owned popular mobile apps TikTok and WeChat. Clean Network has also added a number of industry leaders as clean companies, including Oracle, HP, NEC, Fujitsu, and Cisco. I was almost half expecting to see SolarWinds Orion at the end of that list there. But anyway, bringing in clean companies to the coalition was a strategic aspect of expanding the value proposition, according to Crack. The clean companies, they need to be able to trust the 5G networks in a country in order to invest or expand their operations. And if they can't, they will look elsewhere. Announcing that you're a clean country is going to send a great signal to the U.S. private sector, and this is a good place to invest. That's what that sends to the world. Now, Crack defines the 5G effort as a beachhead in a wider economic battle against the Chinese Communist Party. He believes the alliance of democracies is the golden key as it lays the groundwork for many other areas such as clean currency, clean data, and clean Internet of Things. And make no mistake, we have to clean everything up. We're now finally starting to realize just how dirty and messy the online world actually is. The next areas outside of technology have already begun, according to Crack, with clean infrastructure and clean financing, which is called the Blue Dot Network, to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. Other initiatives focus on clean minerals, clean supply chains, and clean labor prices. I think they should also do another initiative for teenage children called Clean Your Room. So maybe the government can make one of those, pump it through the internet, and program them through their cell phones that they should clean up their room. Anyway, come on, you know what I'm talking about. Transatlantic Alliance. For the past few months, and I'm a dad, by the way, just because of how cheesy that joke that I just cracked was. And I just made that joke. It just came out of the top of my head. That's how you know I'm a dad. That was the cheesiest, stupidest joke you could have ever come up with, and I've got a million more. For the past few months, We're reading. Crack and his team traveled to Asia, Europe, and the Middle East and Latin America to secure commitments from governments, telecom operators, and multinational companies to join the coalition. The integration of the EU 5G Clean Toolbox as part of the Clean Network during his visit to Europe in late September marks a turning point for the U.S. government. In January 2020, the European Commission, together with EU member states, released the EU Toolbox to ensure 5G networks, to ensure they are secure and they are deployed across Europe. Now, on September 30th, the EU commissioner, I don't know how to say his name, I guess it's Thierry, Thierry, I'm going to just say Thierry, Breton and Crack. So Thierry, Breton and Crack, that sounds like the most shady law firm you could ever go to. And they're probably like $600 an hour. Thierry, Breton and Crack, representing the worst of the worst. Anyway, issued a joint statement highlighting their commitment to shared principles on 5G security. They also announced the synergies between the Clean Network and the EU Toolbox. So any country that implements the EU Toolbox will be considered as part of the Clean Network. Quote, the 5G Toolbox serves as a reference for telco operators, board of directors who are required to make the decision on 5G suppliers, Breton said in the joint statement. If they choose a high-risk 5G supplier and something happens, that board member may actually be liable themselves. So they're putting their own butt on the line if they want to pick China. You see what's actually going on there? They're holding these people hostage to do the right thing. Thankfully, the same day, NATO also threw its support behind the U.S. government's campaign, stressing the importance of having a secure 5G clean NATO network, which is non-fractured. Deputy Secretary General Mircea Gio. Oh my gosh, that is the hardest sentence to say. Try to say that out loud. Look at that. Right there. Deputy Secretary General Mircea Gioana. Say that 10 times fast. Deputy Secretary General Mircea Gioana. We're done. We're going forward. Announced that the majority of NATO countries have committed to joining the Clean Network. Gioana said that I so want to say Genoa, like the salami. Deputy Secretary General Genoa Salami announced anyway, that the majority of NATO countries have committed to joining the Clean Network. Gioana said that the alliance couldn't afford to have some countries using trusted vendors while others used untrusted vendors. He also emphasized the importance of having secure civilian 5G infrastructure during peacetime, all right? And wartime as well, obviously. In October, the Three Seas Initiative, a forum of 12 EU states in Central and Eastern Europe, also announced support for the Clean Network at the annual conference in Estonia. Crack also traveled to Latin America in November to expand the alliance, securing commitments from Brazil, Ecuador, and the Dominican Republic to join the network. NATO members, Turkey, Iceland, and Hungary are still not part of the Clean Network. Quote, I think you'll continue to see more companies and more telcos joining the rapidly growing coalition. So beyond the fact that Trump and Pompeo, this gentleman right here, beyond the fact that they stopped the massive spread of Chinese communist 5G and the implications of security breach and infiltration that come with it, it seems that behind the scenes, it seems they've been traveling the world, all of our American representatives, and creating almost like an alliance. You remember learning in history about World War II, the Allied powers and the axis of evil. Remember, we're in a different war now, a cyber war, a tech war, a cultural war, a social war. Do you really think allies are going to work the same way? So while we've been sitting here bickering about what critical race theory means and whether or not Black Lives Matters actually means Black Lives Matter, which we know it doesn't. We know that it's just a Marxist group pretending, just relying upon our stupidity so that we won't prosecute them. But while we've all been going back and forth and struggling in our own ways, our representatives have been building an alliance, a robust alliance of digital warrior countries fighting China's international technological policy. I think that's a completely different type of warfare, a different type of pressures, of chess, something that we really haven't seen before, and something that not many experts or anybody really, I don't think I've heard identify. I feel like I might be one of the first few people talking about this. I know that a couple other might be talking about similar things, but this secret war that's going on behind the scenes between countries and China, a war of influence, almost like opposite magnetic poles pushing against each other, forcing resistance. Eventually, somebody's going to put more force behind one and crush the other. I don't believe that's going to be China. It will never be China. USA does not work like that. The American people do not work like that. You put enough pressure on us, we don't crack. We fight back. So, folks, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch. I really appreciate you hearing me out and letting me explain to you all of this stuff that's been going on behind our backs. When we've heard little snippets here and there. We heard about, Huawei going bye-bye and then nothing else, right? We heard about the cyber attack, but it kind of was vague and it went bye-bye, right? We've heard about all kinds of these little things, like little shadow whispers, but not until right now did anybody really put it in one big old article that really sums up what's been going on behind the scenes. Now, I know during this, I cracked a couple jokes. We went off track a little bit. I had a little fun. I wanted to have a little fun. It is a big old dry article, ladies and gentlemen, a big old dry article. That's why this thing's been almost 30 minutes. So I hope that I made it digestible for you. And I know that now that you have this information, you must feel better prepared going forward. You must feel better secured, better taken care of. Know that there are people that have our backs going around the world trying to secure our country for us. So while we might be fighting with each other, I'd like to think that Mr. Mike Pompeo and, of course, our president, Donald J. Trump, have our best interest in mind. So thank you very much, folks. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, do me a favor, hit that 5-star rating, all right? Leave a review. Write a review in there for me. It helps move us up the Apple Podcast ratings, all right? We move up those rankings, folks. More patriots get to see what we're doing, get to hear the American Reveille message. All right, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, like, leave a comment. Remember, I don't have any big name sponsors. It's all me. So do me a favor, all right? Share. Please talk about this. Talk about the American Reveille. Tell people to go to the website, www.americanreveille.com, REVEILLE. And we have an awesome new website coming soon, by the way. Also, please, if you could, if you have any feedback, anything that you think we could improve, any ideas that you have for something that would be of value to the Patriots, something we could do, something we could shed light onto, feel free to leave it in the comments section below or email me directly, jameslane@americanreveille.com. That's REVEILLE.com. And if you'd really like to be a little bit more generous than that, and of course, all I expect you to do is just share, listen, and have a good time and become more armed so that we can wake people up. That's really all I ask. But if you really want to do a little more, do me a favor, www.americanreveille.com, REVEILLE, hit the donation tab and feel free to give us a donation. I promise you, it only goes to be reinvested into this organization so that we can grow bigger, we can take care of people, we can help people, we can wake people up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next segment. Bye.